Okay, David, I suppose a really good question is, what makes a good network?
Well, I guess the first part is understanding what are the components of a network.
Yep.
So, again, at a simplistic level, you've got the cabling, so the passive equipment. Then we've got the active equipment, which is in a hotel environment, there's often a firewall, the switches, and the Wi-Fi points. The next component is the connectivity to the network, which is the ISP, which talks a lot to the performance of the network and the experience on the network. And then the last of the four are the layered services that go on top.
Yep. And cabling's important, even though I think a lot of people these days say, well, hasn't everything gone Wi-Fi? Why do we need cabling, right? But it's still the backbone of everything within a hotel network. There has to be a cabling infrastructure.
Correct.
And ideally to every room still, right? With, if we're talking brand standards and getting it right, from my understanding, if I was to build a hotel now or to recommend to somebody, I'd be saying, you cable to every room, you put a small access point with multi-port switch into the room, and then basically you've future-proofed yourself.
Yes, for the foreseeable future.
Yep.
And, it's a good point about needing the cable infrastructure to go to the edges of the property. There was a perception for a period of time that if you just had Wi-Fi, you don't need cabling. You actually probably need more cabling to more areas to ensure that your coverage of Wi-Fi is complete.
Yep, because when we were working together years ago and Wi-Fi was just coming in, it was pre-smartphones, pre the iPhone, we were just going along and putting a couple of access points in a corridor and saying, great, you've now got Wi-Fi. These days, that doesn't cut it, both from a coverage point of view, but also from a speed point of view, right? You've got too many people sharing a couple of access points in the corridor. And I know I've personally stayed in hotels, and if I had the room to my door open, I could actually get Wi-Fi. But as soon as I shut the door, which is fire rated, I lost connectivity completely. Now, that's just not acceptable in today's world, right?
Connectivity is very important to everyone.
Yep.
Getting connectivity to all corners of the hotel, from the housekeeping closets to the car park, to the spa areas, even through the kitchen, is very important operationally for the hotel. One of the reasons, I understand that the brand standards have an access point in each room is to leverage the data port that is embedded in these access points. Yep. The TV and potentially the telephone are leveraging this access point, which is also your Wi-Fi coverage.
Yep.
If you were to put an access point in every second room, while you may have adequate coverage from a guest Wi-Fi and a communication point of view, you lose the ability in every second room to use the data point for the TV or for the telephone.
Yep.
And often those decisions to reduce CapEx have operational implications down the road.
Yep. I think you told me about a hotel that chose to put an access point in every second room, and then they were looking to deploy IP phones, unaware that they could only put a phone in every second room.
Yes. Yeah.
So they're the sorts of, when we talked about scoping earlier in our conversation, they're the sorts of things that if you had treated the brand standards as a minimum, then you really wouldn't have those problems moving forward.
Correct. And the data that comes out of the large hotel groups support that. Their ability to onboard suppliers is faster. The finger pointing is less because there is a standard that everyone agrees to. But the guest satisfaction scores that used to exist before COVID stopped those for a period of time were always higher in networks that met the brand standards.
Okay.
And that often talks to, just the coverage and potentially the amount of bandwidth that goes into the property.
That's great. David, I've seen a great diagram that sort of explains the network in a hotel. Would you like to run through that with us?
So that diagram was designed to share the simplicity of the concept of a data network. And it's no different to the networks that we all have at home or in our apartments, in that you have cabling in your house.
Yep.
You have access point or access points in the house.
Yep.
You have an ISP to your house, and you have services that sit on the network.
Yep.
Now, so often that when we go into a hotel environment and we look at the infrastructure in the computer room, it looks very complex. But that diagram, which I think you'll show here, has been simplified down to show that there are 4 components. There is the cabling, there is the active equipment, which is the switches and the firewall and the access points. There's the connectivity to the property. And then there are the applications that sit on top of the network. And it's in scoping your network going forward that we use that as a tool to help the hotel operators and owners think about what services they may want to layer on their network in the coming years.
Yep.
To ensure that they understand why, if you're cabling the hotel now, to cable to all the parts you may want to get to in the next 5-10 years, because your cabling infrastructure is, one, very expensive to put in,
Yep.
but 2, the next time you review a decision to upgrade the cabling is probably going to be in another 10 years.
Yep.
So you start with getting the cabling right. Then the brand standards talk to having a minimum set of commercially available hardware, and that talks to the uptime and the performance and the security that can be enabled on those devices, and that they can also support the number of solutions that would sit on the network going forward. It's my view that the infrastructure, the cabling and the network devices is an owner asset.
Yep.
We ultimately know the owners pay for
Yep.
pretty much everything that happens in the hotel.
Yep.
But the guest experience and the smooth operation of the hotel, is a decision that is probably led by the brands and the hotel operators around how much speed, what bandwidth they want to the property,
Yep.
and what applications they want to run their business
Yep.
and to support their guests.
Yep.
And so, again, going back to the diagram, the simplicity is there are 4 components. There's connectivity, there's cabling, there's network switches, and then layered services that sit on those networks.
Yep. So the owner should invest in, obviously, the cabling, the network equipment,
Yes.
and then from an operator point of view, they're probably responsible for delivery of bandwidth and then layered services. Are that how you'd sort of break up the 4 components?
Well, the other way of probably working backwards would be that whether it's a hotel or a school or some other use for the property, the cabling and the network switches will support any business that is in there.
Yep.
The connectivity that comes in, which supports the speed and the applications on the network, can often be driven by where the networks and the databases are sitting that are supporting the property. And then the applications are often quite specific to the type of use of the building, which means whoever's running the building probably wants to choose the services that they have in the building at the time.
Yeah.
And as you and I know, there's it's important to have good communication, a lot of transparency between all the parties to ensure that you are making decisions that work for all parties. And the brand standards underpin all of that by creating a platform that everyone can agree on to then move forward with running the business.
Yep. Okay.